Welcome back to class. We're going to take a look at one of the scenes in Act 1. This is actually one particular speech in Act 1, Scene 2, with Lord Capulet, Juliet's dad, speaking to a potential suitor. And when we say suitor here, we do mean a man, Paris, who is coming to ask for the hand of Juliet in marriage. An interesting thing I want to take a look at with this scene before we move on to a very complicated scene, Scene 3, is the use of couplets. You've got two uses of couplets in Romeo and Juliet. Romeo, of course, speaks in couplets whenever he's in a romantic mood. You also are going to find that the older people speak in couplets whenever they're giving advice. Maybe the rhyme makes it stick. I don't know. Look at the couplets here with Lord Capulet speaking to Paris. In this speech, he sounds like a great dad. Let's take a look at, beginning with this line here. She is the hopeful lady of my earth, but woo her gently, or gentle Paris. Get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part. Heart and part, of course. Going down into choice and voice, just looking at the last words of each line. Feast and guest. You still have the ST there. I know we're forcing the rhyme with the short E and long E sound, but a rhyme nevertheless. Store and more. Night light. Feel, heal. Delight, night. See and be. One and none. He's speaking for the most part in this speech in couplets. And the words that he's saying to Paris make Lord Capulet seem like he might be a cool dad. I'd like for you to reserve judgment on that until we get to a little part in Scene 3. And of course, later on down the road, if you think he's a cool dad now, you're definitely going to change his mind. Because what is he really talking about here? He's talking about what we don't know quite yet, but we will soon. That Juliet is potentially too young to get married. She knows nothing about Paris. Juliet doesn't even know that she's going to be part of a wedding soon. It's almost as if she's a commodity. And the word there is chattel, Chattel. Women were looked at as possessions from their fathers, and then the father, of course, giving away their hand in marriage to their husbands. So they go from being possessions of their fathers, doing what their fathers tell them to, of course, being possessions of their husbands and having to do the same there. So when he's telling Lord Capulet, but woo her, or Lord Capulet is telling Paris, but woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part. It's nice words. He's telling Paris, please give her romance. Try to win her love. I think Lord Capulet feels that love is important. But this is a business deal. And it's a business deal that needs to go through. Because most marriages at that time were arranged simply for money or position. And while Lord and Lady Capulet are certainly nobility, remember that Paris is even higher on the nobility chain than our Lord and our Lady. Moving directly into Act 1, Scene 3, a very complicated scene because you're looking at three different types of women with three different attitudes towards marriage. We're going to be comparing and contrasting Lady Capulet, her daughter, Juliet, and the nurse. Now, with these three very different women, Lady Capulet is very refined, she's elegant, she's noble, she enjoys her money most of her day. She has employed the nurse some 11 odd years ago to be the nursemaid to Juliet. So Lady Capulet really didn't have that much of a hand in raising Juliet. It was the nurse. Most people think that Lady Capulet is very cold and distant compared to the nurse, who's not nobility. She's a commoner. She's ill-mannered. She has this bawdy sense of humor, very, very naughty. Can't cannot explain to you what all of her jokes mean. We'll leave you to it on your own there. With all of that, though, compared to Lady Capulet, the nurse is loving, she's warm, and she's Juliet's soft place to fall. This has been Juliet's best friend and mother throughout her days. Now, talking about her days, how many has there been? What we're seeing here in this particular part of the scene is that Juliet is almost 14. She will be 14, according to the nurse, on Lammas Eve. Lammas Eve is July 31st, with Lammas Day being August 1st. And what this is in many parts of Europe, but particularly England, is it's the celebration of the wheat harvest. There's even a Lammas bread that if any of you would like to make and bring in for us to enjoy, we would certainly like that. But talking about the marriage of Juliet to Paris, it's going to be a fortnight and odd days before she actually turns 14 years old. So as they're speaking to her about the potential marriage to Paris, she's only 13. I just want you to know that this was not common during Shakespeare's day. Not at all. As a matter of fact, many females needed to wait for marriage until their late teens, early 20s. So why is Shakespeare doing it? Possibly to create more tension in the stress and the drama that will be happening later. There are some particulars in this small scene with Lady Capulet and the nurse speaking to each other. Remember, Juliet is right there. We find out a little bit of personal history of the nurse, our commoner here, who is Juliet's best friend and loves her so. Susan. Susan was the nurse's daughter. God rest all Christian souls. So Susan, unfortunately, is dead. Now, what more than likely happened to allow Lady Capulet to get the nurse into the family to help take care of Juliet is they hired her as a wet nurse to take care of and breastfeed Juliet when she was a baby. We do talk about weaning Juliet later on down here in the speech, weaning her from breastfeeding from the nurse. That is not uncommon. Most women of nobility would not have breastfed their own children. Many people ask, what purpose does the nurse's ramblings serve? I mean, just look at the sheer length of her speech there, and she's not done yet. She will be interrupted, and then she's going to come back and say some of the same things again. The purpose that it serves primarily is for comic relief. She's hilarious. She's absolutely hilarious. But in what she's saying, she's giving us all of this personal information about Juliet that Juliet's mother simply does not have. And that, once again, is showing us just how close the relationship is between the nurse and between Juliet. Juliet really does look at her as her mother figure, certainly not her mother, and that allows the nurse to also become Juliet's best friend. In this part of the scene, particularly whenever Juliet says, as far as the marriage to Paris, that it is an honor that I dream not of, you're looking at three very different women with three very different views of marriage. Lady Capulet, of the noble rank, she's going to marry for money. She's not going to marry for love. She's going to marry for status. She's going to marry for position. She does not look at a marriage contract as being that is sanctified by God and it's about love. It is a contract. It's a business deal. The nurse, our commoner, looks at marriage, well, in a common way, that women's role in marriage is just to have children, propagate the earth. But Juliet, when she's finally asked, would you ever take a look at Paris as a potential husband? How stands your disposition to be married? You know, how do you feel about being married? It's what Lady Capulet asks her daughter. And Juliet's response is a very famous line. It is an honor that I dream not of. We're looking at the innocence of Juliet. with how she responds to her mother and the nurse later on. She says, I'll take a look at Paris at the party tonight, and if I like him, then maybe. Juliet wants her marriage to be about love, which is a very modern ideal, the whole getting married because you love someone. You also have to remember the role of women in Shakespearean society. Remember the word I used before, chattel, that they are possessions of their fathers and then of their husbands. And once again, remember Lady Capulet would be marrying for marriage, for status, and nurse marrying for children, showing women really as the object of men's desires. Lady Capulet further proves her point to Juliet that this is going to be a marriage of a business deal. In this one little speech down here, where once again, just like what I was telling you with Lord Capulet speaking to Paris, once these noble adults start giving advice, they start rhyming. So we have liniment, content, lies, eyes, lover cover, pride hide, glory story, possess and less. So this means that Juliet's ears needs to perk up. She needs to listen to her mom. Her mom thinks she's giving her great advice. Take a look at the last few lines of all this great advice given to Juliet in couplet form. And this, of course, is about marrying Paris. Romeo is not in our scene yet. So shall you share all that he doth possess by having him, making yourself no less. Juliet will share in all of the wealth and all of the status that Paris has, which is going to be more than the Capulets have, even though they do have a lot. And then we have some dramatic irony here. We know, according to that prologue, Juliet's not going to marry Paris. They're not the star-crossed lovers spoken about in the prologue, in that Shakespearean sonnet. The dramatic irony here is we know that Juliet and Romeo will be together. So we know that she's going to say no to Paris. If you're forgetting about dramatic irony, think about, once again, your favorite horror movies where you have someone walking into the room. The audience knows the bad guy with the chainsaw is right behind the door, but, ooh, that person doesn't. And we still scream when they get it and as they walk through the door. That's the dramatic irony. The audience knows something that the characters do not. Don't forget about the nurse. You know, she's always got to put in a little bawdy joke. And there it is. Not saying that she's agreeing, of course, with Lady Capulet when Lady Capulet says that you'll share all that he doth possess by having him, making yourself no less. The nurse, of course, says, no less, nay, bigger. Women grow by men. Okay, make that maybe joke 3, 4, 5 from the nurse so far in this play. She is talking about women growing bigger by men through pregnancy. That is her view of marriage, that women are only there to give birth to the next generation. It's all the worth that we have, according to the nurse, but not according to our Juliet, which is why we love her so. All right, since a picture speaks 1,000 words, and I really feel like I've been the nurse and rambling at least my 5,000 out in this round of our classroom, take a look at this still from a very famous version, movie version, of Romeo and Juliet. There you see with that fantastic headpiece on, Lady Capulet, looking very stuffy, very proper, very cold, very distant, but chic nonetheless. You see Juliet, of course, in the middle, and there's our nurse. This is how most of the actresses will portray the nurse. The nurse is, as you see there, loving and kind. Juliet almost looks afraid of this alien-like being in front of her with that headdress that I must say is everything. But the nurse there with the loving, warm embrace and the look on her face, that's just somebody that you'd want to talk to, or, of course, you'd want to hear a dirty joke from. See you guys tomorrow.